It is a pleasure to be back in Dubai. I think I've been here about a dozen times, and this is the third time at this conference. So 3 of these events so far, this is the third one, and I've been at every one of them. And it's wonderful to connect to each and every one of you. I'm Michael Rasmussen. I'm a GRC analyst. I describe my job as research. I research what are the challenges companies like yours face in the context of governance, risk management, and compliance, or GPRC with the performance, and how do you go about solving those challenges with strategy, process, and technology? So let's talk about the future of business, the future of GRC. First off, we have decisions to make. What is our future? As you can tell by several of my slides, I'm a science fiction fan. And so is our future a Blade Runner future, for those familiar with the Blade Runner movies? Are we headed towards that environmental, social dystopia of Blade Runner? Are we headed towards a future that's more like Star Trek? If you look at the Star Trek movies, it's an environmentally clean, green, but also socially cooperative environment. Of course, they're movies, so there's tensions and resolution, but it's a very different future when you contrast Blade Runner to Star Trek. And the decisions, not only that governments make or individuals, but the decisions corporations like yours make, puts us on the path to one of these two futures. And what is that future? How do we navigate? How do we get there? How do we manage the risk within the business? There's lots of quotes that I love on risk management. A US president from 100 years ago, Teddy Roosevelt, said, "Risk is like fire. If controlled, it will help you. If uncontrolled, it will rise up and destroy you." Judge Mervyn Keane from South Africa, he's the impetus for the Keane 1, 2, 3, and 4 reports on corporate governance. He said, "Business is the undertaking of risk for reward. Businesses take risks to make money." But talking about that future of risk, we'll go to my favorite quote of all time on risk management, Captain James T. Kirk of the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek. Season 2, episode 20 of the original series. He's got that executive committee there. He's got Spock and Bones, or if you prefer, Dr. McCoy, Scotty there. They're making a decision. Do we go on this mission? And Captain Kirk gets up and says, risk is our business. That's what this starship is all about. That's why we're aboard her. Talking about that future, every business is a starship of risk. The business that's not taking risk is the business that's out of business. Operating in the world and being in business means that you take risk. You have to take the right risks and manage those risks well. I remember an article, I think it was about 2007 from The Economist magazine. It was called "Goldman Sachs Behind the Brass Plate." And it actually, when you read into it, it was talking a lot about Goldman Sachs' risk culture. And compared them to Lehman Brothers. Now, this is 2007, before the 2008 financial crisis. Lehman Brothers, who was known for being very conservative in taking risk, didn't take on a lot of risk, didn't survive 2008. Goldman Sachs, who was known for being very aggressive in risk-taking and taking a lot of risk, survived and flourished. Now, why? It was part of their risk culture. They had a culture that when you're making significant risk decisions, you got people together, and it was a collaborative effort. If you're making decisions on risk as an individual by yourself, you were shown the door. They didn't want you in the organization. But if you made risk decisions, and they're aggressive in taking risk, and you got team cooperation and agreement that this is the right risk, you went forward with it. It was part of their risk culture. But risk is our business. Every business takes risk, or you're out of business. We don't operate in a bubble. But speaking of that environment, the modern organization is what I characterize as navigating chaos. It's changing minute by minute and second by second. Laws and regulations are changing. If you use some of the figures, like Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence, global financial services firms are dealing with 257 regulatory change events every business day, coming from about 1,300 regulators around the world. Another firm that I've talked to in HISA that monitors regulatory change in ESG and EH&S, environmental social governance and environmental health and safety, they're monitoring 300 regulatory changes globally every business day. That's a lot of legal and regulatory change. How do you keep up with that? And that's cross industries, that latter point that I made. So lots of legal and regulatory change. But then you have a changing external risk environment. Every business doesn't operate in a bubble. We operate in the external world, and there's risks. There's geopolitical risks and tensions and conflicts and uncertainty and foreign exchange rate fluctuations and commodity availability and supply chain disruptions and environmental disasters. And they impact our business and the supply chains and everything else that we have. But then the business itself is changing. Employees change, processes change, technology change, strategy changes. And we have to keep all that in sync. And then the modern organization is not characterized by brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. The modern organization is the extended enterprise. The web of third-party relationships, vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, intermediaries, and more. Their issues are your issues. And you have to, and just as much as your environment's changing, their environment's changing. And you have to keep all that in sync. That's challenging. That's chaos. And not only that, you have to map all those legal and regulatory changes I mentioned. You can be completely knowledgeable about the law and regulation. You can answer every question. But if that process changed and that control wasn't in place, or that employee came in and they weren't trained properly, you're not compliant. You have to keep all the business change in sync with the regulatory change and in sync with the risk change. And that's challenge. And it's an interconnected risk environment. The physicist Fritjof Capra stated, the more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are interconnected. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent. The physicist at the time of this quote was talking about biological ecosystems, but he might as well have been talking about risk in your business today, because it's an interconnected environment. She referenced a story that I told in Riyadh a few days ago. It's the story of the Titanic. The Titanic, what went wrong with it? Captain E.J. Smith, the CEO of the Titanic, stated before it set sail, I have never been in a wreck, I never saw a wreck, I cannot conceive of any disaster happening to this vessel. It sank on its maiden voyage. You had overconfidence by the senior executive of the ship, the captain. But not only that, you had overconfidence by the public. The front page of the newspaper said the Titanic was unsinkable. It sank on its maiden voyage. There's your first risk, overconfidence. How often are businesses overconfidence? They had to push to get across the Atlantic quickly to show its speed and power of the day. There's your second risk. How often are we pushing the business faster than it can keep up? And adding on to that, there's external risks. As I mentioned, your business doesn't operate in a bubble. It operates in the external environment filled with risks. The Titanic had that. The tidal moon poles of January, February, March 1912 were of a stronger nature that were dragging those icebergs further into the shipping lanes, creating more hazards than were normally there. Health and safety risks. There wasn't the proper number of life preservers and lifeboats for the number of passengers on board. The ship sank slowly, but they had nowhere to go. Next, they tell us that the size of the rudder and propeller were undersized for the size of the ship. It was not as navigable in the waters as it should have been to be able to navigate the waters of risk. And it could have got around the iceberg if it had that. Now, it left port with a boiler fire that was out of control. There was a fire on board as it left port, and it still went. And it was heating up the sides of the ship, causing weaknesses. Not only that, getting into the extended enterprise and supplier risk, the iron ore used in the rivets to hold the seams of the ship together was of a brittle and inferior quality. Supply chains and quality issues. They had oversight functions, like most of us in the room, second and third line functions. The Titanic was getting warnings from other ships in the area saying, they were getting telegraphs from other ships in the area saying, warning, icebergs in the area. One of the responses back from the Titanic was, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Can you imagine that? EU DORA, shut up, we're tired of hearing about it. Or whatever the regulation is that you're facing. Now, the Titanic had technology, like many of the vendors that you have out here in the exhibit hall, to scan the ocean for hazards like icebergs. Back in 1912, that type of technology was called binoculars. Many of these solutions that are out here in the exhibit hall are like binoculars looking for risk across your systems and things to help warn you and see what's coming. Now, the problem with the Titanic was the crew member that had the key to the cabinet where the binoculars was kept was assigned duty to another ship before it set sail and took the keys with them. They didn't have access to the technology. Now, the Titanic was headed towards that iceberg. If it would have hit it dead on, only 2 compartments would have flooded. It was designed to stay afloat with 4 compartments flooded. It was headed towards that iceberg. It tried to navigate because it saw it too late, didn't have the binoculars. But the size of the rudder and propeller were undersized, so it was not as navigable. It brushed up against the iceberg. The weak iron ore in the rivets and the fire caused the seams of the ship to rip wide open. It sank, but it sank slowly. There's time to get off the ship, but there wasn't the proper safety equipment. It was a multifaceted risk environment. You address any 1 or 2 of those risks, we might not ever have had the disaster of the Titanic. But all of those contributed to the disaster. And we need visibility. We can't be managing risk in all these little silos where IT security sees its thing, and HR sees its thing, and accounting sees its thing. We need to see across risk, the interconnectedness of risk. That's our challenge. Leonardo da Vinci stated, realize that everything connects to everything else. Those little things matter. Like the flutter of the butterfly's wings in the Netherlands can create tiny atmospheric changes that can influence the development path of a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico. That's what they call chaos theory. Those little things matter in your business. But so often with risk management, it's like we're driving a car or flying a starship, talking about the future in Star Trek. But, we're not looking at the road ahead of us. We're looking at the road behind us. So much of risk management is about, the risk assessments that are looking at the past, but not on what's going on in front of us. Can you imagine driving a car, not looking at the road, but just looking at the rear view mirror all the time? You'd get in a wreck. But so much of risk management is focused on the rear view mirror and the dashboard and not on the road ahead of us. ISO 31000, the international standard on risk management, says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Well, think about that. If risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, where are your eyes? Your eyes are on the road. We might glance at the rearview mirror, we might glance at the dashboard, but we're looking at the road, the objective. Where are we driving to? That's risk management. That's GRC, that's GPRC. The official definition of GRC found in the OSEG GRC capability model that I helped contribute to is that GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives. That's the governance. They can be entity-level objectives, division, department, process, project, or even asset-level objectives. What are those objectives? They can be financial, operational, ethical objectives across those areas. But the G in GRC is about the objectives, and we perform against those objectives. The R is addressing uncertainty, risk management. ISO 31000 says risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. And the C in GRC is compliance, or it's about integrity, acting with integrity. So the official definition of GRC is it's a capability to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. But too often, organizations approach GRC backwards. It's CRG or CR or just C, and we forget the objectives. We need the objectives and strategy and performance. That drives risk and compliance and gives it context to operate within. There's the slide. I was ahead of myself here. But GRC is a capability to reliably achieve objectives, address uncertainty, and act with integrity. So I teach a lot of workshops around the world. In fact, I'll be teaching a master class at the end of today on risk and resilience management in GRC. But I was teaching my risk and resilience workshop in Amsterdam just over a year ago. And we had a lot of attendees in the room. And one of the attendees was the chief risk and compliance officer for a medical device manufacturer in Europe. And he told this story. And the story was he's getting interviewing for this job. And the CEO, CFO, COO were all in the room interviewing him. And the CEO looks this candidate in the eye and says, if you're going to be our new risk officer, what does that mean to me as a CEO and these other executives? And this candidate who got hired looks the CEO in the eye and says, it's my job, if I do it correctly, to see that you have no surprises in achieving your objectives. And the CEO says, wow, that's the best answer anybody's ever given me for risk management. And he was hired. But that's our job. It's about uncertainty management. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, the official definition of risk in ISO 31000. And so that means we're not looking at the rearview mirror at the past. We're glancing at it, but we're not driving by it. We're looking at the road ahead of us. What are those objectives? What's the uncertainty in achieving that objective? If we're driving the car, can an animal jump in the road or some other obstacle? What's that other car in front of me going to do? We're looking at the head of the road ahead of us as we drive down the road to achieve our objective. And that means we're looking and constantly thinking through these things to ensure that we have no surprises in achieving those objectives. Now, risk management's complicated. We need this top-down view of risk with strategy and performance and objectives. We also need this bottom-up, in-the-weeds view of operational risk and resilience and control. And how do we bring those together? Both are absolutely critical, and we need to align those. There's this amazing tunnel in Greece called the Tunnel of Epanelos, and it was built like over 3,000 years ago without modern engineering and technology. And they started on both sides of the mountain, and they came together with precision and met in the middle, this tunnel. That's what needs to happen with risk, is we need this top-down strategic view of risk aligned with objectives, as well as this bottom-up operational control view of risk resilience down in the depths of the organization. Like the butterfly's wings that I mentioned. Those little tiny things matter. And so not only do we need top-down strategic intelligence on objectives and risk, but operationally down in the weeds and bring all this together into a complete perspective. And being able to model or changes the organization. That's why what Tor Inga mentioned about the digital twin is so important as we look at these type of things. So we're aiming for that risk agility and risk resilience. Resilience is the recovery from a risk event. And it's the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, the ability of a substance or object, or in our case, a business, a process, or a service, to spring back into shape. Resilience. So if I'm like running down the street here in Dubai, and I trip over something, resilience is how quickly can I get back up and start running again. Agility is the ability to move quickly and easily, to think and understand, to see what's coming at us, and to go around it and navigate it. So if I'm running down the street in Dubai, I see that obstacle, and I leap over it or go around it. We need to have both risk agility and resilience in our organization. This also requires what I call GRC orchestration. There's lots of departments of risk out there. As we build towards this future of risk, it requires orchestration across these departments. So I've been working with this one large global hospitality firm. And at some point, they're going to be going to RFP, but they've been looking at all their internal systems, and they've interviewed 30 different risk departments. This is their head of risk. There's a central risk function, but he's trying to herd the cats right now because there's 30 different risk departments scattered in the organization, and he found 10 different GRC platforms deployed and tens of thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails with no central view of risk. A lot of times it's hurting those cats to be able to get all these things together. It's what I call orchestration, because we need that conductor. Who's going to see across all these things and see? Because if IT security is looking at IT risk, they're not looking at other risks and how they intersect. It's this chief risk officer role that's seeing across all these and orchestrating and being able to see this. You look at a symphony orchestra. You got the violins and the violas, the cellos, the bass, the woodwinds, the brass, the percussion. And all these work together to form a great piece of music. Now, if they're all left to themselves and they started playing by themselves without a conductor, it would sound awful. But it's that conductor of risk in GRC that sees across these things and keeps things flowing in the collaboration and communication working together. So we need to be able to focus on aligning GRC for the future with business strategy, performance, and objectives. When I look at solutions in the market, and my job as an analyst, my competitors are Gartner, Forrester, Verdantix, Chartis. I spent 7 years at Forrester as their top analyst. I got their top analyst award regularly, and now 18 years competing against Gartner and Forrester as an individual boutique. But in that context, when I look at solutions out there in the market, one of the things I look for is, do they do the G in GRC? Can they really help us align with the objectives and performance and strategy, or are they just more down in the weeds risk and compliance solutions? We need GRC that's aligned to the business strategy, performance, and objectives. We also need to be able to see the future and see what's going on. I'm a huge Lord of the Rings Tolkien fan. I have a whole paper I wrote in graduate school on Tolkien and his philosophy. So I'm a big Tolkien person as well as science fiction, so fantasy too. But when in the Tolkien world, you have the Palantir, what we might know as a crystal ball, to be able to see what's going on and see the future. And that's what we need with risk management, is to be able to see, the multiverse of risk. Maybe you like Marvel movies with all the superheroes, and you have that multiverse where there's multiple realities. Risk management's about exploring those multiple realities. As we try to achieve this objective, what are the different scenarios this can play out? How is it going to impact the organization and its operations? Again, that's why a digital twin is so important, to be able to model and forecast what's going to happen to the organization under different conditions. We need that forecasting, scenario, and risk simulation. We also need good GRC and risk intelligence. It's not just about a technology platform, it's about strategy and process that feed into it. But it's also about all this external information, geopolitical risk feeds, economic feeds, regulatory intelligence feeds. Winston Churchill had this quote that I love, and I just wrote a blog on this about a month ago. True genius resides in the capacity for evaluation of uncertain, hazardous, and conflicting information. To be good at risk means we're taking in a lot of information and be able to navigate this and filter it in so that we can be intelligent about the risk decisions that we're making in the organization for the future of business. This also requires that we reinvent GRC. GRC as a technology area and as an acronym started back in February 2002. I know that because I was the first to use the acronym GRC when I was at Forrester, and I wrote the first 2 Forrester GRC waves, comparing solutions in the market. And there's 6 generations of what I call GRC software. And we'll get into that in a minute. But those 6 generations lead to what I call business integrated GRC. E.F. Schumacher and Einstein, I don't know who, I've heard it attributed to both, stated, any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite directions. When I talk about GRC innovation, re-architecting GRC, we need to stop adding additional layers of compliance and risk band-aids and integrate GRC into the business, into business strategy, performance, and objectives. This means that we have this top-down approach that aligns GRC management strategy with processes and an information technology architecture that can support that. Technology doesn't get you GRC by itself. I get very frustrated, like when this one large insurance company called me in and said, we just bought GRC, come and tell us how to do GRC. Well, that's putting the cart before the horse. What were you doing before? What are you trying to change? Every organization does GRC. Every one of you does GRC. You might call it ERM, ORM, IRM, ABC, XYZ. Everybody does GRC, whether you call it GRC or not. Not one of your firms are going to tell me that we lack governance, we can care less about risk, and we're ignorant of compliance. Everybody does something for GRC. The question is maturity. How can it be improved? And technology can improve it, but at the end of the day, GRC starts with strategy and process. It starts with culture, behavior, and transactions. And technology enables that. So you can't buy GRC. Technology can be used to improve GRC. Now, 6 generations of GRC technology, from GRC 1.0 to 2.0, to 6.0. GRC 1.0 started in February 2002, as I alluded to when I was at Forrester. I started the GRC market and mapped technology into it. But what else happened in 2002? Enron and WorldCom. For you millennials and things out there, that's what started the whole internal controls or financial reporting fiasco and things like that, because Enron and WorldCom had a lot of corruption. And so it brought about Sarbanes-Oxley. And so while I had a broad vision for GRC, that GRC 1.0 was really about the Sarbanes-Oxley captivity of GRC. GRC 2.0 was really about more of my original vision. How do we enable second and third lines to work together and collaborate and share information? GRC 3.0, which is about 2013, was, okay, there could be a core platform, like many in the showroom over there, but not everybody does everything. There's specialized solutions for credit risk and market risk and commodity risk, like oil trade and all this stuff, that is risk information that can feed in. But there's also integration into internal business systems, SAP and Oracle and HR systems, and there's feeds out into intelligence providers like regulatory change and geopolitical risk information. And so is GRC architecture. And then we moved into GRC 4.0. And GRC 4.0 doesn't go away. The 5.0 and 6.0 are built on 4.0, but 4.0 is the agile GRC. Low-code, particularly no-code solutions that are highly configurable and adaptable to your organization that don't break on upgrades. GRC 5.0 is cognitive GRC, and so how do we take that agile GRC and implement artificial intelligence to make risk and compliance more efficient, effective, resilient, and agile, and provide more value to the organization? And GRC 6.0 is that business integrated GRC. the future that we're trying to get to, where business integrated GRC is the next generation of GRC technology with a view focused on performance. So we call it GPRC. GRC becomes an integrated part of a business management platform. The idea of a siloed GRC platform goes away to manage GRC as an integrated platform of the business, its objectives, its performance, and the risk and compliance, control, and assurance in this context. So where are you at today? What's your current state? A lot of you are what I call the Winchester Mystery House of GRC. You know, there's a sprawling mansion built in California, in San Francisco Bay Area, called the Winchester Mystery House. It was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. You calculate inflation, that's a very expensive house today. It took 38 years to build, had 147 different builders, but it had no design, no blueprint, no architect. At the end of the day, it doesn't make sense. It's got doors that open to walls or 20-foot drops, halls that go to nowhere, staircases that go up or down to nowhere, skylights that are in floors instead of ceilings. It's chaos. This is a lot of GRC programs in your current state that over the last 38 years, you've had 147 different builders of GRC where IT security's done its thing, and accounting's done its thing, and procurement's done its thing. And nobody stepped back and said, how should it be designed? How should it work? How can it support and integrate into the business? So what's your current state? What's your future state? And what's your road to get there? And that roadmap to get there, you should build a business case. And when I work on business cases, there's 4 areas that I focus on: efficiency, effectiveness, resilience, and agility. Efficiency is time saved and money saved. Before it took us 200 hours to build that risk report for the board of directors. Now it's there in 5 minutes. You can calculate a return on investment there. Before, 80% of our staff time was spent chasing documents, spreadsheets, and emails and not managing risk and controls. We're going to flip that on its head. That's efficiency. Effectiveness is more accurate, complete, reliable, less things slipping through cracks. Resilience is the ability to find issues and address them when they're still small issues before they become something big to hurt the organization. And agility is looking at that road ahead of us. The objectives, the strategy, what's developing, the horizon scanning, and what's going on 6 months, 12 months out. How does that play out in helping or hurting the organization achieve its objectives? That's the agility. So we're looking for business integrated GRC. We're more aware of our risks across different functions and not just letting them be managed in silos, but there's that orchestration. We're aligned to work together and collaborate. We're responsive to changes in the business, changes in the regulatory environment, changes in the risk environment. This allows us to be agile, to see the road ahead of us, just not looking at the rearview mirror. We're resilient in finding issues and addressing them. And we're leveraging good technology to support this strategy, like our vendors out there in the showroom, to make this more efficient, time saved and money saved. I'm just a little bit over time, but besides my role as an analyst with GRC 2020 Research, I also own the grcreport.com. My son Samuel is the editor-in-chief and writes most of the articles there. But it's a global news website on governance, risk, and compliance news around the world. So, thank you so much.